Welcome to True Crime Chronicles, where we uncover the real stories behind America's most disturbing crimes. Every case has a beginning, and a truth that deserves to be told.
Like, subscribe, and turn notifications on to stay up to date.
West Virginia, a state of winding mountain roads, isolated hollows, and towns where everyone knows your name. It's often ranked as one of America's safest states, but safety doesn't mean immunity. Tonight, we examine 5 of the most dangerous killers in West Virginia history, cases so disturbing they shattered the illusion that violence only exists in big cities. These are not rumors, these are documented crimes, and these are the stories that changed West Virginia forever. West Virginia has long maintained a lower violent crime rate than the national average. Murders here are statistically rare, but geography plays a role. Remote communities, limited law enforcement resources, and economic hardship can create blind spots, places where predators operate undetected. Historically, crimes in West Virginia were often discovered late, investigated slowly, and sometimes tragically mishandled. And when violence happens in a place built on trust, the damage cuts deeper. Case 1 in July of 2012, a quiet town in West Virginia became the center of one of the most disturbing teen murder cases in American history. 2 high school girls, best friends with their victim, planned and carried out a brutal killing that shocked the nation. This is the story of Shelia Eddy, Rachel Schoaf, and the murder of Skylar Nees. Shelia Ray Eddy. Shelia Eddy was born on September 28, 1995, in Blacksville, West Virginia. Her parents divorced when she was young, following a serious car accident that left her father with a brain injury. Shelia was raised primarily by her mother and later moved to Morgantown, West Virginia. She attended University High School, where she appeared outgoing, social, and well-liked. On the surface, Shelia seemed like a normal teenager, but behind closed doors, she was manipulative, secretive, and increasingly hostile toward her longtime friend Skylar Nees. Rachel Elizabeth Schoaf. Rachel Schoaf was born on June 10, 1996, and raised in Morgantown, West Virginia. She came from a strict and religious household. Her father was a respected public figure in the community. Rachel attended private Catholic school before transferring to University High School, where she became close friends with Shelia Eddy and Skylar Nees. Rachel was described as quiet, obedient, and emotionally conflicted, often struggling with guilt and anxiety. Skylar Annette Nees was born on February 10, 1996. She lived in Star City, West Virginia, with her parents. Skylar was an honor student, intelligent, kind, and ambitious. She worked part-time at Wendy's and dreamed of becoming a criminal defense attorney. She had been friends with Shelia Eddy since childhood and trusted both girls completely. On the night of July 6, 2012, Skylar Nees snuck out of her bedroom window after receiving text messages from Shelia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf asking her to hang out. Unbeknownst to Skylar, the 2 girls had already planned her murder. They brought kitchen knives, cleaning supplies, and a shovel in the car. They drove Skylar to a remote wooded area near the West Virginia-Pennsylvania border. Once there, Shelia and Rachel counted to 3 and attacked. Skylar was stabbed more than 50 times. She screamed and fought back, but she was overpowered. The girls attempted to bury her body but were unable to dig deep enough, leaving her remains hidden beneath branches and leaves. After the murder, Shelia and Rachel returned home as if nothing had happened. Skylar was reported missing the next morning. Police initially believed she had run away. Shelia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf actively participated in search efforts, posted memorial messages online, and comforted Skylar's parents, all while knowing she was dead. Security footage later showed Skylar entering Shelia's car the night she disappeared. Investigators also found inconsistencies in the girls' stories. Months later, the pressure became too much for Rachel Schoaf. In January 2013, she suffered a mental breakdown and confessed to police. She led authorities to Skylar's body, confirming the horrific truth. Forensic evidence, including DNA found in Shelia's car, sealed the case. When asked why they killed Skylar, Rachel stated they simply didn't like her anymore. There was no robbery, no jealousy over a specific incident, just a cold and calculated decision to eliminate a friend they no longer wanted. Rachel Schoaf. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10 years. She remains incarcerated, with parole repeatedly denied. Shelia Eddy. Shelia pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with mercy, making her eligible for parole after 15 years. She is also incarcerated at Lakin Correctional Center in West Virginia. Skylar Neese's murder devastated her family and community. Her case led to changes in West Virginia's missing child alert laws, known as Skylar's Law, ensuring faster action when children disappear. This case remains one of the most chilling examples of betrayal, where friendship turned into murder. 2 girls, 1 victim, a crime so senseless it still haunts West Virginia to this day. Case 2. Between 2017 and 2018, a trusted nurse inside a Veterans Affairs hospital in West Virginia used her position to quietly kill the very people she was meant to protect. Her victims were elderly military veterans. Her weapon was insulin. This is the chilling story of Retta Mays. Retta Mays was born in 1976 and raised in West Virginia. Little is publicly known about her early childhood, but those who knew her described her as quiet, reserved, and unremarkable. She did not come from a wealthy or well-known family and lived a relatively private life. There were no widely reported signs of violent behavior in her youth. Mays eventually pursued a career in healthcare, becoming a licensed practical nurse. She later gained employment at the Lewis A. Johnson Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia, a facility dedicated to caring for U.S. military veterans. At the VA hospital, Mays worked primarily on the medical ward, caring for elderly and critically ill patients. Her job gave her direct access to patients' medications, including insulin, a drug that can be deadly if administered incorrectly. Co-workers later described her as withdrawn and emotionally distant. Some said she struggled with personal issues and dissatisfaction at work, but nothing initially suggested she was capable of murder. Between April 2017 and June 2018, a disturbing pattern emerged at the VA hospital. Several elderly male veterans, none of whom were diabetic, suddenly experienced severe drops in blood sugar. Many went into comas, some died. It was later discovered that Retta Mays had been injecting patients with insulin they were never prescribed. At least 7 veterans were murdered, and 1 additional victim survived but suffered serious harm. These men were vulnerable, elderly, and dependent on hospital staff for care, making the crimes especially heinous. The victims were U.S. military veterans, many in their 70s and 80s, receiving treatment for unrelated medical issues. They were fathers, grandfathers, and former service members who had survived war, only to lose their lives in a hospital bed. Their families trusted the VA system to keep them safe. Doctors initially believed the deaths were caused by natural complications. However, hospital staff became alarmed when unexplained hypoglycemia cases kept occurring, often during the same nurses' shifts. An internal review revealed that the insulin incidents almost always happened when Retta Mays was on duty. Federal investigators were called in. Surveillance data, medication logs, and witness interviews all pointed to Mays. In August 2018, she was arrested by federal authorities. After her arrest, Retta Mays confessed to injecting insulin into patients without medical need. She later admitted she did it because she felt angry, dissatisfied, and wanted to exert control. There was no financial gain, no personal connection to the victims, just a calculated abuse of power. In 2020, Retta Mays pleaded guilty to 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault. She was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences, plus additional time for the assault, ensuring she will die in prison. The case became one of the deadliest serial killings in West Virginia history. The murders exposed major failures within the VA hospital system, leading to policy changes, staff reviews, and national outrage. For the families of the victims, justice came, but too late to save their loved ones. Retta Mays remains one of the most dangerous and disturbing killers West Virginia has ever seen, not because of chaos or rage, but because she killed quietly, behind hospital walls, wearing a nurse's uniform. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a monster in the dark. She was a nurse, and her victims never saw it coming. Case 3. Eugene Blake is one of West Virginia's most notorious violent offenders, a man whose crimes span decades and multiple states. His case shows how one brutal killer repeatedly slipped through the cracks of the justice system, only to strike again with even greater violence. Eugene Blake was born on February 11, 1945, in Huntington, West Virginia. Very little is publicly documented about his childhood or family life. He grew up in West Virginia during the mid-20th century and later became a truck driver. There are no detailed records of abuse, schooling, or early behavioral problems before his first major crime. Blake's violent history began with a brutal attack in January 1967. While driving on a road in Wayne County, West Virginia, he forced 18-year-old Donna Jean Ball off the road and stabbed her multiple times. Ball initially survived the attack and tried to escape, but later died at the hospital. Blake was arrested the next day and charged with her murder. In 1968, Blake was convicted of first-degree murder for Ball's killing and sentenced to life in prison without mercy, meaning no parole. However, after years of supposedly good behavior behind bars, the governor commuted his sentence to one with parole eligibility, and Blake was released in 1979 after serving only about 10 years. After his release, Blake's violence resumed with chilling brutality. Mark Withers, 1982. In March 1982, Blake encountered 21-year-old Mark Withers and a 17-year-old girl parked at Gould Park in Bridgeport, Ohio. Blake approached them, demanded money, and when Withers rolled down the car window, Blake shot and killed him. He then raped the teenage girl before fleeing. That case went cold for decades. Mary Ann Hope Helmbright, 1984. On October 26, 1984, the body of 13-year-old Mary Ann Hope Helmbright was found in Osage, West Virginia. She had been raped and strangled to death. Blake was eventually indicted in 1985 for her murder and related statutory rape charges. After his 1984 crimes, Blake was convicted in 1985 for the murder and rape of Mary Ann Helmbright and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison in West Virginia. Decades later, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to re-examine the cold case of Mark Withers' murder. In 2008, DNA evidence linked Blake to that killing. He was extradited to Ohio and in 2010 pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and related charges to avoid the death penalty. Blake received a 20 years to life sentence in Ohio. Donna Jean Ball, age 18, stabbed by Blake in West Virginia in 1967. Mark Withers, age 21, shot and killed by Blake in Ohio in 1982. A teenage girl with him survived a sexual assault. Mary Ann Hope Helmbright, age 13, raped and strangled by Blake in West Virginia in 1984. Each victim represents a life cut short by senseless violence, from a teenager growing up in West Virginia to a young man with his whole life ahead of him. Eugene Blake remains in prison serving multiple life sentences across states. In Ohio, his bid for parole was denied with the next review scheduled for 2032, largely due to prosecutors and victims' families asserting that someone with his violent history should never be released. Blake's case highlights major failings in the justice system, from an early parole decision that allowed a violent killer back onto the streets to decades of cold cases only solved through modern DNA testing. His crimes spanned continents of cruelty and took innocent lives that can never be replaced. A man once released after a single murder went on to commit even greater crimes, proving sometimes the most dangerous monsters wear the mask of second chances. Case 4. Ronald Turney Williams was born on April 4, 1943, in West Virginia, and grew up long before detailed public information about his childhood was widely recorded. Unlike some criminals whose early lives show clear warning signs, Williams's childhood and family background remain largely private and undocumented in public records, but he eventually became a career criminal involved in burglary, armed robbery, and other offenses before his violent crimes escalated into murder. In 1975, Williams murdered Beckley Police Sergeant David Lilly in Beckley, West Virginia. This killing came after years of smaller crimes and marked the beginning of his notoriety as a violent offender. For this murder he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison at the West Virginia State Penitentiary. While serving that sentence, on November 7, 1979, Williams joined 14 other inmates in a dramatic escape from the penitentiary. During the breakout, he encountered West Virginia State Trooper Philip Kessner, who was off duty at the time, and Williams shot and killed him as part of his effort to flee. After escaping, Williams remained a fugitive for around 18 months, during which time he continued his violent criminal lifestyle, including traveling to Scottsdale, Arizona, where on March 21, 1981 he broke into a home and shot John Bunchek, an innocent resident who came to investigate onlookers. Williams evaded capture for nearly 2 years, using multiple aliases and moving around, and became one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. He was eventually tracked to a motel in Manhattan, New York, and when confronted by FBI agents a gunfight broke out. Williams was seriously wounded during that shootout and apprehended on June 8, 1981. After his capture, he was brought to justice for the crimes he committed while on the run and for his earlier offenses. In West Virginia, he received a second life sentence for the murder of the state trooper and his previous crimes, and in Arizona in 1984 he was sentenced to death for the murder of John Bunchek. Williams remains incarcerated at the Mount Olive Correctional Complex in West Virginia, serving his sentences. His known victims include Sergeant David Lilly, Trooper Philip Kessner, and John Bunchek, each of whom lost their lives to his violent actions. The story of Ronald Turney Williams is notable not just for the murders themselves but for the way he escaped justice for so long and how his time on the run added further tragedy to his already deadly criminal legacy. Case 5. Joseph Eisel was born around 1834 in the Grand Duchy of Baden in what is now Germany and spent part of his youth serving 2 years in the Papal Army, including a year in Rome before deserting and living in the mountains, a common fate for deserters of the time. Around 1864, he emigrated to the United States and settled in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where he married and worked sporadically as a carpenter or woodworker but struggled financially, spending much of his time in saloons and accruing debts. In 1867, his life took a dark turn when he began a brutal crime spree targeting fellow immigrants and acquaintances he associated with financially. In June of that year, he attacked and killed Joseph Lilienthal in Parkersburg with a hatchet, then later lured Alois Ulrich to a secluded area near the Hempfield Railroad in Wheeling and hacked him to death before stealing money and belongings, and in December he murdered Rudolf Suter in his apartment by bludgeoning him with a hatchet, shoving a glove into his mouth, crushing his temple and slashing his throat, again taking cash to pay off debts. After a failed attempt on a fourth victim on January 6, 1868, when he swung his hatchet at a coal merchant who survived and alerted bystanders, Eisel dropped his weapon and tried to flee but was quickly captured by police. Once in custody, he was linked to the earlier murders through items found among his belongings and eventually confessed in writing to all 3 killings. At trial, he pleaded guilty to the murders, appeared calm and unmoved as the proceedings unfolded, and was sentenced to death. On March 6, 1868, Joseph Eisel was publicly hanged outside Parkersburg in front of thousands of spectators. His victims, Joseph Lilienthal, Alois Ulrich, and Rudolf Suter, were fellow immigrants whose lives were cut short in a series of senseless and violent attacks carried out by a man whose descent into murder shocked the communities of West Virginia during that period. This has been Crime Chronicles. If you want more state-by-state deep dives, subscribe and turn notifications on.